Behind the risque skits on the 90s cult classic Eurotrash was the voice of Johnny Daukes. Raised in Didcot, his story took an unexpected turn, which he's written about in his new memoir, Shadowman. And Johnny joins me on the line right now. Johnny, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Hello to my friends. I just got a bit flashback to Eurotrash.
Yeah, you see, you're doing Antoine there. That's a common mistake, is that people thought we did European accents, and we didn't. We just did British regional accents.
Yeah.
So as much as I like speaking like Antoine, I never did on the programme.
Yeah, it's very good though. But look, before we talk about you and Eurotrash, of course, I mean we know your voice from actually 16 series of Eurotrash in the 1990s. But your story, my word, it's a fascinating one. But it starts when you were very, very young, doesn't it? And I like to start from the beginning. But Johnny, just tell us about your mother and her religious conversion in your early teenage years, which changed a lot.
Well, it wasn't really a religious conversion. She was Catholic and from a large Catholic family. But it was when she was introduced to a Catholic organisation called Opus Dei that I think it began to have an effect on our family, in that it sort of it put a bit of a wedge between my parents. And then when I was 10. I started going to a boys' club in Oxford that was run by Opus Dei, and that's when things went decidedly sideways for me.
Okay, so I mean, basically, effectively, your formative teenage years hijacked, I suppose, by the people that were meant to protect you, i.e., your parents. It sounds like your mother was taken away as that maternal guidance.
I'm not sure it was that she was taken away as maternal guidance, but it was the fact that her vision became a bit blurred by, I think, the religious side of it. I think when I went to the boys' club, and as you know, you've read the book, I was then sexually abused by a guy that ran the boys' club for the following 5 years. And because of my mother's beliefs in Opus Dei, I think it rather blinded her and made her very trusting of a relationship that I think a parent would ordinarily have had a bit more, would have been a bit more wary of, shall we say.
That's going to have a huge effect on you. And I mean, I'm listening, as a parent as well, and that's hugely heartbreaking. But eventually, you left home. So did you feel almost alone? Because, I mean, what you did was you carved out an incredibly successful career with the burden of all that pain. But how do you...
I think it's interesting because I talk about this quite a lot, because I've done quite a lot of things, but I'm not completely sure that I'm not exactly like a household name or anything. I've never been afraid to try stuff.
Yeah.
But I think what was obviously the reason I wrote the book, really, it wasn't so much these terrible things happened to me as a child, but it was the fact that I then wrote about them for really the following 30 years, in initially writing songs and music in my band Finn, then writing comedy for Radio 4, and then making an independent feature film. And in all of those projects, I was writing in part about what happened to me as a child without knowing that that's what I was writing about. I mean, the most graphical example is a song that I wrote in 1992 when I was in Finn, and I wrote a song called Shadowman. And I thought at the time I was writing about sexual abuse from an intellectual point of view. I thought I was writing about an imagined protagonist, and actually it's very, very, very clearly writing about my own experiences. But at the time, I had literally no understanding, or I had no acceptance or acknowledgement of what I'd been through.
Yeah. It must be very difficult once you had worked that out, that was much more about your own experience. That must be an incredibly difficult song. Those lyrics must be very difficult to look back on.
Very difficult, and that's one of the reasons when I wrote the books. It took a couple of years from first, sketching ideas out to actually getting the book published. But in the last 6 months, while it was really occurring to me how many of these songs. It's almost like all the way through the 90s, and the early 2000s. I'd been keeping a diary almost, or a retrospective diary, trying to realize what had happened. And while I was writing the book, I actually tried to play a couple of the songs that I hadn't played for 20 odd years. And now in the here and now, understanding what I'd been writing about, I got too upset I couldn't play them. And that was one of the reasons why I re-recorded some of the songs and have released the album simultaneously with the book. So I put an album out that came out in October called Shadowman Records Remade, and I re-recorded 11 key songs that it's almost like I wanted to take possession of them back somehow, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does, absolutely. So, I mean, despite the tragic circumstances, that did occur during your childhood. I mean, we'll go back to your career, and actually, you've had all sorts of degrees of success, and you mentioned Radio 4 and all the comedy writing, and of course the music as well. But can we hear a little bit more about Eurotrash? Because that was I remember so vividly watching that with Jean-Paul Gaultier and Antoine Dugas, and loving it and feeling a little bit uncomfortable at times, thinking, oh, that was a bit rude.
What, because your mum and dad were in the room?
Yeah. Well, yeah, often I would look at my father and just very slyly look at my father.
Dad seems to be enjoying this as well.
Well, he looked very, very uncomfortable, but
very sheepish. But it's extraordinary because I'm sort of quite an avid Twitter user, and it comes up so often on Twitter. Yeah. Anybody that's in their kind of mid 40s to mid 50s, basically, it was a part of everybody's growing up, really. And I think like anything like that, when you're actually doing it, you never occurs to you the significance of it. But it was really great fun. I actually got into doing it. I wasn't an actor or a voice artist. I was an editor, and I was editing a pop program called Rapido, which was also presented by Antoine de Caunes. And while I was doing it, I was always messing around doing accents with the producer, a guy that I'd worked with previously at MTV. And he just said to me one day out of the blue, he said, "Look, we got this new show coming, and we got this idea for doing British regional accents and revoicing all these clips. And you're good at accents. Do you want to do a voice test?" So I was like, "Yeah, fine." I mean, I was an editor. I didn't even know what a voice artist was, really. And I did a few tests, and they went, "Yeah, that's really." I think they'd already done series 1 because Johnny Vaughan had done series 1, and I think he's a brilliant broadcaster and a very, very funny man. But I think he didn't quite have the versatility with the accents. So they were all coming out sounding sort of estuarial, and I did it, and I could pretty much do anything from Greenock to Cornwall to Bolton to anything, really.
But when did you discover that, though? Because you are a great impersonator, you are great with accents, but how did you develop that? It was because
our mum. This is really weird. We had there were eight kids, so there's 10 of us around the table, and we would come down for breakfast, and you never knew what was going to happen. You would come down for breakfast, and you'd walk in, and Mum would be like, "Right, who's having cornflakes this morning? Come on, you get down there." And it'd be like, or it could just as easily be, "The boiled eggs going to be put on the table in 5 seconds." It was just like, I don't know where it came from, but she would just speak in any and every accent, and I found it. I quite like that. I could mimic it, and it's that thing, I suppose, when you're little, of getting your approval of your parents, especially when there's 8 of you. Yeah. So I found it easy. So I kind of steered right into it. So I think I became her sort of idiot theatrical accomplice in some ways, But it was great. I mean, it was great fun. It was like when we were little, like I say, we lived in Didcot. Although when we were little, we always referred to it as Didcot change for Oxford, because we didn't really spend much time there. The only thing we ever did, as soon as we were secondary school age, where most of us went to school in Oxford, and you realised that Didcot was really it was a dormitory, really. But yeah, and I don't know. We were quite a ramshackle unit until the religion really started to kick in, and then it wasn't quite so much fun, really.
Yeah. Do you come back to Didcot? Do you ever kind of kick around?
I don't come back to Didcot as such, no, because my mum died in 2007. My dad was actually the mayor of Didcot, and his mother was the mayor of Didcot as well. So I've got pictures of my dad in his mayoral chains.
Wow.
And going. In fact, I think there's a roundabout in France named after my dad, which is a pretty random fact, really. Oh yeah, another roundabout named after your dad. Yeah. And but yeah, so my dad's mum was the mayor of Didcot, and then Dad became mayor of Didcot, and he was very proud of. He was very proud of the town, sort of quite oddly so. But yeah, and then Dad kind of remarried about 5 years ago, and finally moved out of Didcot, and then passed away a couple of years ago. So I don't really have any connection to Didcot. Although I did, when I launched the book, we had a sort of launch night up in town in London, and 4 or 5 people that I knew from when I was a kid turned up, which was just really unexpected and really quite wonderful.
You should come to the Cornerstone.
It was a brilliant place to grow up.
Yeah.
Because it was like, Didcot back then, we drove back there actually, me and my sister went and had a look at Didcot about 4 or 5 weeks ago. And I just didn't recognise it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's just been developed. We basically almost lived in fields, really.
So which part where in Didcot? I know Didcot.
So I was born in London, but we moved to the first road we lived in was Freeman Road in Didcot, which was sort of one side of the town. And then when I got to 11, we moved to a bigger house with an extension on it because there were 10 of us, and we moved to a road called Lloyd Road.
Uh-huh.
But when once we moved to Lloyd Road, I was then at school in Oxford. Originally I started at a middle school called St John Bosco in Junction Road in Cowley, which was quite strange because I went from this tiny village primary school in East Hendred. Yes. I went to this idyllic little village primary school where there were only 90 kids, and at any one time, 5 or 6 were my own siblings. And then I was transplanted at 11 into the land of the giants. It was like, I can clearly remember my first day at John Bosco, and Mum had, I had the blazer, the Clark's Attackers, the school tie, and everybody was wearing Oxblood Dr. Martin boots and had sports bags. And I was like, I had to get with the program very quickly, which I did by applying Tipp-Ex to my leather satchel and turning it into what I thought was a sports bag, which didn't really work very well at all.
Gosh, you've taken us so back in time.
And then after that, after 2 years there, went to Edmund Campion, which is no longer there, which was in Iffley Turn.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which again is a housing estate now.
I mean, Tipp-Ex and Oxblood Doc Martens. Wow, gosh, I had all of that as well. I really did. I mean, in terms of your relationship with your mother, though, did that repair? You said that she passed away some years ago, but
I mean, it did to an extent, because I kind of rejected like religion as soon as I left home. Once I was, in fact, I was in the process of rejecting it, which rather propelled me out of the home. But and I made no secret of the fact that I thought it was all nonsense, and so that didn't go well. But then after a few years, I think there was a sort of grudging respect. But then when I said to everybody what had happened to me as a child, that caused a further schism, really, because, as is often the case, even though people initially accept what you're saying, there are then attempts to minimize and that then became hugely problematic.
Yeah. Johnny, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on as a guest,
Likewise.
actually. And actually, I mean, Shadowman, your memoir, it's been described actually as an extraordinary and liberating read, and a unique book as well about pain, art, memory, love, all of those big questions wrestled with like only you can do that. And of course, the music as well, Shadowman, 11 songs for the album as well. All the best with that. Thank you so much for coming on and telling us about it. It's been an absolute pleasure. It really has. And thank you also for all of your memories of Didcot. Thank you. That's at Johnny Daukes. And by the way, I know some of that, certainly at the start of our conversation, was really, really hard to listen to. If you have been affected by anything that you've heard this morning, you can contact the BBC Action Line.